Good morning and welcome to the Faculty of Engineering and Architectural Science graduate orientation on financing your education. We have a really jam-packed agenda for you folks today, so I've sort of structured it into a couple different sections. So we'll start with introductions. I'll formally introduce who I am, and then I will give you a snapshot of the Student Financial Assistance Department and what we're all about. Then our first section will be about student awards and scholarships. So I'll give you a definition of what scholarships, awards, and bursaries means, talk a little bit about award spring, and we'll also talk about external scholarship opportunities as well. And then we'll wrap up with student financial assistance, where we will talk about the OSAP program quite extensively, the Career Boost graduate program, as well as some budgeting and other student savings tips. So again, hello, my name is Bianca, and I am Assistant Manager of Student Financial Assistance at Ryerson University. I also graduated from Ryerson, so I am a sociology graduate from the Faculty of Arts, and I will graduate again this October with my certification in organizational leadership. Aside from work, I'm also a career mentor through Ryerson's Tri-Mentoring program, and some of my hobbies include retro video gaming as well as traveling. So on the screen, you can see a picture from one of my favorite spots to travel to, which is Hawaii. So in terms of who the Student Financial Assistance Department is, I always love talking about this slide because much of what I find students understand about financial aid offices tends to come from Hollywood depictions, which aren't always that accurate. Financial aid offices tend to be these very scary, ambiguous places, but at Ryerson, we're really hoping to debunk some of those myths. So Student Financial Assistance is primarily responsible for administering the Ontario Student Assistance Program, OSAP for short, to about 30,000 Ryerson students, and that's whether they're graduate, undergraduate, or continuing education students. Aside from administering the OSAP program, we also support students who are getting government assistance through out-of-province and U.S. student loans, so things like FAFSA and Sallie Mae. We support the Career Boost program as well as the Career Boost graduate program. So that's the on-campus employment program here at Ryerson. We provide emergency bursary assistance for students in unforeseen exceptional circumstances that are directly impacting their educational obligations. And over the last year, we have moved towards a more financial literacy, budgeting, and money management for students model, where we're really trying to get students comfortable about speaking about money, but also understanding how they can best make their money work for them. So, like I said, talking about money can be very, very nerve-wracking. And for many folks, especially folks who are considering the OSAP program, this may be the very first time that you are going to be responsible for your own actions, and those actions being money. In many cases, a large sum of it. And so my hope is that by the end of this presentation, not only will you have a better understanding about the different ways to finance your education, but that you will be making a more informed decision and choice about how you want to finance your education based on the information I'll be sharing with you today. So we're going to get started with the Student Awards and Scholarships section. So I wanted to first define what scholarships, awards, and bursaries really means, because we tend to use those words interchangeably, but there's some clear differences between them. Now, whether you're saying scholarships, awards, or bursaries, these are all forms of financial aid designed to help students pay for post-secondary education. And typically, these don't need to be repaid. Where the nuances come in are as such. When we're saying scholarships and awards, we're typically talking about financial aid that is a one-time disbursement or renewable each year. And it's typically awarded based on academic merit, academic criteria, or merit. On the flip side, when we're talking about bursaries, these tend to be a one-time disbursement, awarded for financial need or exceptional circumstances. At Ryerson, we have a fantastic platform known as Award Spring, which is your one-stop awards application. So as graduate students, there are some university-wide awards available on the Award Spring platform specifically for you. Award Spring is basically a scholarship management platform where by creating one application, Award Spring actually automatically applies you for every single scholarship that you are eligible for as graduate students. So this is a really great opportunity for you to be able to maximize your funding, because with one app, you can make sure that all of the opportunities available to you through Award Spring are going to be linked. So if you haven't created an Award Spring profile yet, I highly encourage you to do so. You can create one on the awards website, ryerson.awards.ca. I will also note that as graduate students, your graduate school is where you will find things that are graduate school specific, faculty specific, or department specific. So while university-wide awards are going to be available on AwardSpring, you will also find many, many award opportunities available to you. And I've included the hyperlink in this presentation. And as a sidebar, you will be getting a copy of this presentation, which will include all of the hyperlinks that will be embedded throughout. In terms of other scholarship resources, there's always our Ryerson Student Financial Assistance website, but I've also listed some others that many graduate students find particularly helpful. So Ontario University's info is one. There's also Scholarships Canada, and there is YConic by Student Awards. So all of these are really great to find Ontario-specific or Canada-wide scholarship opportunities that are available to you as graduate students. Okay, so pivoting to the second section, Student Financial Assistance Opportunities, where for much of this, we will be talking about the OSAP program. So in terms of what OSAP is, I find that there's so many different ideas of what the OSAP program is all about, but much of it is either untrue or not entirely true. So hopefully by the end of this section, I'll be able to debunk some of those myths, but also clarify what OSAP really is. So when we're talking about OSAP, we are talking about the government financial aid program that helps students pay for college or university. OSAP is a needs-based assistance program. So what that means is that your funding eligibility is determined based on your individual student needs. So that's really important, that word individual, I'd like to highlight that. Being such an individualized program, very important to note that OSAP will not look the same for every single student. It's really based on your individual student needs, your individual family situation, your individual circumstances. So there is not sort of one cookie cutter of what everyone is going to look like and all the funding that they'll be eligible for. So it's very important to not compare your application to other people's because we all have our own unique needs. The second point I'd like to highlight is that OSAP is not designed to cover all costs of attendance. So what that means is that attending higher education is a shared responsibility between the government, the student, the family, and by extension, the institution in the form of scholarships, awards, and bursaries. So we like to always say that OSAP is sort of a piece of a pie. So it's one way to help finance your education, but it is not the only way. In terms of how you apply to OSAP, it is an entirely online application, and we will go through that in a few slides. But important to note that OSAP is a program that you opt into every semester or every year, depending on how long you want it. So it's not a program that you sort of opt into once, and then if you're in a 2-year program, you're locked into it for 2 years. It's not how it goes. You're able to opt into it for the academic year in which you wish to be considered, and then if you don't wish to be considered for it for the next academic year, then you simply just don't apply. So that's very important to note. It's not a commitment that you are locked into for a set amount of time. It is something that you actively enroll into on a per semester or per year basis. In terms of how OSAP funding is determined, like I mentioned, it's really looking at your personal financial situation. So some of the main factors that it's looking at are your parental income or spousal income if you have a spouse or common law partner. It's looking at the size of your family, including if you also have other folks who are attending higher education at the same time as you. It's looking at your income, savings, and assets, any major scholarships that you've been awarded, whether internally by Ryerson or externally. And an important thing to note, any scholarship that you are receiving that is given to you by Ryerson, please don't report it on your OSAP account. Our department will do all that work for you. So you're only required to be reporting scholarship opportunities that are external from Ryerson. And the final personal financial situation piece that OSAP looks at is your living situation. So whether you're living at home versus away from home, perhaps you're living on residence or maybe a little bit closer to campus. A really great thing to note is that registered education savings plans, so RESP assets, don't need to be declared on your OSAP application. And that's fairly new. It's about a 2 to 3 year change to the OSAP program, but it's a really great way to continue to maximize your funding. So if you have RESP assets, the application actually doesn't even ask you to declare it. But note, if you have our RSP assets, so our registered retirement savings plans, the application will ask you to declare that. In terms of how aid is determined, and just a little aside from the previous slide, but in another way, it's looking at educational costs. So what is the cost of your books, your tuition, your living expenses? And it's looking at all the different resources available to you in the form of student expectation to contribute, parental and spousal expectation to contribute, as well as scholarships and bursaries. Then when we put all those things in the pot, we determine financial need as per OSAP. In terms of who is eligible for OSAP, to be eligible, a student has to be a Canadian citizen, permanent resident, or protected person. And of course, they have to be an Ontario resident, given that it is an Ontario government aid program. They need to be attending or entering an OSAP-approved program in school. So very important to note that Ryerson is an OSAP-approved school, and many of our graduate programs are OSAP eligible. So as FEAS students, all of your faculty is OSAP eligible, which is great to note. And then finally, you need to be enrolled in or entering a certificate, degree, or diploma program that is a minimum of 12 weeks in length. And given that you are likely going to be here for the entire academic year, nothing to worry about because the academic year is about 34 weeks in length, so you definitely surpass that 12 weeks in length threshold. So a common misconception with the OSAP program is that taking OSAP means that I have a lot of money to pay back, but OSAP actually offers two types of funding. So you could be considered for loans, which is money that you do pay back, but there's also grant funding, which is money that you don't need to repay. So when you apply for OSAP, you're automatically considered for both loans and grants. So it's not like you have to do a separate application based on which one you want to be considered for. One application will consider you for both. If you are assessed to receive grant funding, it's important that if you only wish to receive the grant funding, that you indicate that on your application. So when you are applying, there will be an opportunity to select the no loan grant only funding option. So please check that off. If you have already applied and you didn't know about that option and you're only interested in receiving grants versus loans, please log on to your OSAP portal and indicate that you only wish to receive grant funding, because in the coming weeks, we are going to start dispersing OSAP funding. And if you have not indicated that, then both your loan and grant funding will disperse. Another important thing to note about this is that you have to make sure that if you only wish to receive grant-only funding, that every time you apply for OSAP, you indicate that on your application. So remember a couple slides ago when I mentioned that OSAP is a program that you opt into on a per semester or per year basis. That also means that it's important that you're checking off that no loan grant only funding option each time you apply, should you only wish to be considered for grant funding. In terms of how OSAP funding is dispersed, OSAP funding is automatically applied against a student's tuition and any mandatory fees that the school may charge. So what that means is that when we, as in student financial assistance, go to confirm your enrollment, we are going to look at your RAMS account and see if you have any fees outstanding. And we will be remitting, as in sending money to, the institution in the form of your RAMS account first. If after sending money to the institution, you still have OSAP funding for the fall semester left over, then any excess will be deposited into the bank account that you authorize when you apply for the OSAP program. It's very important that the bank account that you authorize is actually your bank account. So it ideally is not a parent's bank account or a family member's bank account. It's very important that it is your bank account, because when you're entering into that contract with the government and the lender, which is known as the National Student Loan Service Center, you are consenting that the bank account you are providing is your own. And if there's ever any issues with your funding disbursement and the bank account is not yours, it can be a little bit tricky to track the funding and to support. So just make sure that the bank account you're authorizing is one that is on your name. In terms of funding disbursements, this is a really important piece for graduate students particularly. Graduate programs typically run for 3 semesters, from September to August of the following year. The way that the OSAP program is structured is that OSAP funding is released twice during the academic year. So if you're applying for full-time OSAP, that means that your first installment is going to be released in fall, typically in September, and your second installment will be released in winter, typically in January. What that means is that your winter semester OSAP funding is intended to be applied to both winter and spring-summer semester fees. So it's important that you budget accordingly because you will not be receiving another disbursement in spring-summer. So once again, although graduate programs run for 3 semesters from September to August of the following year, OSAP funding is only released twice, in September for fall and in January for winter. So that winter disbursement is very, very important that you are budgeting accordingly. If you will not be continuing studies into the spring-summer semester and you will wrap up in winter, I should say, it is important to notify our Student Financial Assistance Office so that we can adjust your OSAP file. Your OSAP file is going to read that you are in courses from September to August, and so your funding will be assessed as such. But if you are taking less time and wrapping up your program sooner, or maybe taking a short-term withdrawal of some sort, it is very important that you are letting us know so we can adjust your application as quickly as possible. A consequence of not adjusting it and failing to let us know is that you can have overpayments on your file. And depending how big that overpayment is, you might end up restricting yourself from receiving further OSAP. If you are a student who identifies as any of the following groups, you may be eligible for additional funding. So if you are a student who identifies as Indigenous, a student with a disability, whether temporary or permanent, or a student who is deaf or hard of hearing studying outside of Canada, please make sure you indicate that on your application as you will be eligible for additional funding sources. So like I mentioned, OSAP is an entirely online application, so you can get started at ontario.ca/OSAP. If you already have an OSAP account, then you're welcome to log back into that. But if you are new to the OSAP program, you will click register to register as a new user. OSAP will give you what's called an OAN, an OSAP access number, and it's important that you keep this in a safe spot as you will need it to continue logging on to your OSAP portal. From there, you will complete an application, which starts with a really great financial literacy module, which shouldn't take too long to complete. That is broken down into 4 sections that tackles things like biographical information, parental or spousal information if necessary, and it might also ask you some questions about your financial situation. Another important thing is that there are always required documents that go with an OSAP application. So that online application piece is one part, but the second and most important part is that you are uploading the required documents that are noted on your profile. Now, every student might have different required documents because it is based on the information that you input. So it's important that you are looking at your own OSAP portal and uploading all of the required documents to the respective spot. An OSAP application cannot fully process until you provide the requested documents onto the portal. And it's very important that you do so in a timely manner, as currently our document processing time is about a 3 to 6 week turnaround from the date of submission. Now, step 5 notes to upload, mail, or deliver documentation to the financial aid office. But given that Ryerson is working on an essential services model and we are working remote, please just upload it directly to your OSAP portal. Not only is this the fastest, but it's also safe. It's encrypted, so it's great because you have that sense of security, whereas if you mail it, it could get lost in the mail. You'll also complete the MASFA, so the Master Student Financial Assistance Agreement. So that contract that I was speaking about a couple of slides ago, the MASFA is your lifetime loan agreement. So it is the agreement that you are entering into as yourself, with the lender, and with the government that basically says that you agree to repay this at the end of your term. And then finally, tracking the status of your application online. So as our Student Financial Assistance Department continues to work through student files, you will be able to see when we are working on your file and when we have either reviewed it or approved it, or if we're asking for more information. So that OSAP portal really becomes your absolute best friend because it's not only how you interact with us, but it's how we and the ministry interact with you. So it's important that you check on it like your best friend and do so once a week. Some additional Ryerson tips to get your OSAP funding quick is, of course, applying for OSAP and making sure that you submit all of your required documents noted on your OSAP portal as soon as possible so that your funding can process. Now, if you're looking for explicit dates and deadlines, we actually have an entire webpage on our Student Financial Assistance website that will let you know the different application dates and deadlines. Now, with the graduate program, it's a little bit different from how the OSAP program assesses undergraduate or continuing education students. So as graduate students, your choice to apply for full-time or part-time OSAP is directly linked to the delivery of your graduate program. So what that means is that if you are in a full-time grad program, you need to apply for full-time OSAP. And if you are in a part-time grad program, you need to apply for part-time OSAP. So regardless of your course load. If the program you are in, the name of your program says, name of your program full-time, please apply for full-time. And the same goes for part-time. And like I mentioned, make a habit of checking your OSAP application regularly. So I wanted to add a slide in about what happens if your OSAP hasn't arrived when tuition is due. So I have put a link onto the slide deck here about significant dates each year to find tuition payment deadlines. And we typically encourage folks to apply for OSAP by June and submit all of the required documents so that funding is here on time for September, as it tends to take about 6 to 8 weeks. But if you're listening right now and you haven't yet applied, please do so urgently. Or if you only applied maybe a couple days ago or a few weeks ago, a good thing to note is that every term startup at Ryerson, we actually delay late fees to the following month. So although fees are due in September, late fees actually don't get charged until October. So that's a really great way to sort of get some buffer room. And that's pretty consistent with every term. So we delay term startup, late fees, October for fall, February for winter, and May for spring, summer. So that wraps up the student financial assistance section. We'll pivot to earning while you learn and on-campus employment. So earlier I mentioned the Career Boost graduate program, which is still a relatively new venture here at Ryerson. So we had our first iteration of the program over the spring summer term, and it was a huge success. And I'm very excited that we were able to secure funding to continue this into the fall and winter semesters this academic year. So the Career Boost graduate program is open to full-time graduate students who are Canadian citizens, permanent residents, or protected persons. And ideally, they have applied for at least one of the following. So OSAP or out-of-province student loans for the upcoming fall 2020, winter 2021 application year, using funds from an RESP, or using a line of credit from a bank or a private lender. And students should have a clear academic standing, which is waived for first-year students given that you're new, so you wouldn't yet have an academic standing. So I will note that full eligibility requirements are still being ironed out and will become available on our Student Financial Assistance website in October 2020. So very soon, we're almost into September. So keep your eyes peeled onto our website for more information about the Career Boost graduate program, its launch, and its eligibility requirements. Right now, it's slated to be launched in about mid to late October. In terms of budgeting and other student savings tips, I always like to talk about how to budget. So budgeting for school can definitely be daunting, especially if it's not something that you've ever done. Budgeting is something you need to be really intentional about and dedicate some solid time to, but it is always best to plan ahead. So things like applying for scholarships, filing your taxes, especially if you're applying for the OSAP program, is very important. Setting up Ryerson as a payee with your online banking so that you're able to pay your tuition on time. But like I mentioned, most importantly is creating that budget form and sticking to it. So I put into this presentation a really good budget form from Higher Ed Points, and it's great because all of the algorithms are already inputted for you. So it lists different expenses and then different sources of funding. So you can just populate the numbers in, and then you want to focus on the gap. The gap is the amount of funds that are not addressed for. And so you want to find different ways to sort of get that down, whether it's perhaps through the Career Boost graduate program, or applying for more scholarships, or getting another job sort of off campus. Another thing that I do want to mention about the Career Boost graduate program is that all of the jobs offered will be largely done remotely. And if a job does require your physical presence on campus, it will very explicitly state that in the job posting. but given that we are operating on a essential services model, many of the opportunities will be ones that can be done remotely from the comfort of wherever you're residing. Although we are definitely confirmed remote for fall term, still up in the air about winter, I did want to add some slides about how to save on commuting costs, given that Ryerson is a commuter school with about 85% of our faculty, staff, and students being commuters, myself included. So if you are taking Go Transit, a great way to save is through the Go Transit student ID card, which provides eligible full-time students with discounted fare using their Presto card. So what you're able to do is get a Presto card if you don't have one already, apply for your Ryerson student ID card, which we call the One Card, and then apply for the Go Transit student ID card. And you can visit any Go station so that your Go card and your Presto card can be associated together and save you money. And this is a really great way to save, especially when I was no longer a student and I started paying adult fees, I definitely noticed the difference. So if you are going to be using Go Transit, I definitely encourage you to link your Presto and Go Transit student ID card. If you're a little more local and you'll be taking the Toronto Transit Commission, TTC for short, you're able to get a post-secondary student monthly Metro Pass, provided you are enrolled in a full-time degree or diploma program. And that is available directly through the TTC. Other discounts and savings tips, it's always important to ask for discounts all the time. At Ryerson, our One Card gives us a lot of great discounts to restaurants around campus. And there's also things like the Student Price Card, SPC card, which many of you may already be familiar with. SPC is a really great company that's very student focused and has partnered with so many different vendors, from food to clothing to travel to car rentals. So if you don't have an SPC card, you can actually get one online. The card has gone digital on the SPC card website. Another great thing to note is that the SPC card might actually be available to you for free depending on who you bank with. So double check with your bank first before committing to purchasing an SPC card. It's about $10 if you just purchase it directly from the vendor. But depending on who you bank with and what types of accounts you have, they might actually have a partnership with SPC that allows you to get a free card. Your bank is also a really good friend, and so it's important to chat with them about budgeting tools and other financial advice to help manage your educational funds. And finally, a really great way to save is through saving on textbooks, which can be very expensive. So as counterintuitive as it sounds, I always encourage folks to try not to purchase their textbook until the first class, because very often what happens is that you rush to purchase the textbook, but then you only need a couple sections of it. And it's sometimes, for me, easier to just spend some time in the library, read those few sections that I actually need, take my notes, and save money on the textbook. Another thing is that not all the time do you need to buy the newest textbook. Older edition textbooks may work. So in the certificate that I just wrapped up, all of my textbooks, of course, ask for the newer edition, but I just asked my professor, hey, I was actually able to find, say, the 9th edition online. I know this class is asking for the 10th edition, but is it really a disadvantage if I used an earlier textbook? What parts are we using? And many of the times, it actually served as no disadvantage to me to use an older textbook, and I was able to save a lot of money. So it's worth having a chat with your professor to see if older edition textbooks may work. Ryerson also has the Ryerson textbook collection available through our library. So our library's been doing a really great job of trying to gather the most common textbooks that students use and then offering them on short-term loan. So this is great if you are really in a bind and they have a textbook available that you were able to loan for a short period of time. If you have Facebook, there is also Facebook buy and swap pages. At Ryerson, we have Ryerson Textbook Market, which is a great place for students to buy, swap, and sell textbooks. If you are okay with a digital version of a textbook, you can always look online for PDFs or free ebooks, which tend to be available directly through the publisher. So some of my textbooks were actually available directly on the publisher website, which is great. It's great to have extra access to textbooks, and it's a really great shift that many publishers are taking. So it might be worth even checking out their direct website. And then finally, there's Amazon, which is always great to find things at a cheaper price. In terms of websites for student deals, Our student affairs team actually does a really good job of consolidating the different deals that are available specifically to Ryerson students. So you can check out their growing list at studentlife.ryerson.ca/deals. And then finally, on our student financial assistance website, we have an entire section dedicated to financing your education, which is largely an overview of this presentation, but also has many other great discounts and savings tips. And that is pretty well the end of the presentation for all of you. I will be staying online right to the end. I imagine that there's a lot of questions coming through the chat, but before I pivot to that, I did want to mention the OSAP website as a really great resource. Again, our student financial assistance website as a really great resource, and the Ryerson Student Guide as well, available at ryerson.ca/student guide. This is a really great overview of all of the different things and timelines and deadlines that you need to be aware of as new students to Ryerson. So thank you for joining me for this presentation. I am going to mute myself and close my video, and as Asuza moderates, I will unmute myself and come back on. So thank you for listening.
Thank you, Bianca. The session was very, very informative. So we have a few questions, and I will start with the first question. So this student made an OSAP application, but unfortunately the application was closed before they were able to enroll in courses. Now the student is asking how to reopen the application.
Great question. So you can contact us through the Service Hub, and ideally you would contact us today because next week we are actually closed. So we can focus on processing documentation and getting OSAP funding out to students. So typically our Student Financial Assistance Office operates on Mondays, Tuesdays, and Thursdays. So we're closed Wednesdays and Fridays, but next week we will be closed for the entire week. So today is really your last day to contact our office through the Service Hub. And you can do so at 416-979-5036. Ask to speak with a financial aid advisor, and then they will be able to reopen the application for you.
Thank you. So the second question, this is related to the OSAP application as well. Because this student understands that students are paid in September and January, so they're wondering about the semester or end date that they should indicate on the application. Should it be just only for the fall term, or should it also cover the winter term as well?
So that's really up to the amount of terms that you wish to be considered for. So if you only want to be considered for fall semester funding, then you would only be applying for the fall semester. If you wish to be considered for both fall and winter, then you're going to want your application to be September to April. If you are in a graduate program that will be 3 semesters long, so September to August, then you are going to want to make sure that you are applying for September to August. So it's really up to you for how long you wish to be considered for OSAP funding for in this upcoming academic year.
Thank you. And another question, this is more of a general question. The student is wondering how they are able to ask for installment for their tuition. I'm not sure if this is something you can address, or if you know who they might be able to contact. I think that would be helpful.
So in terms of installments, we typically pay in installments. So we pay fall semester fees in fall, winter in winter, spring summer in spring summer. If what you were more so asking is how to set up a payment plan, perhaps, then that would be through our RU debt-free office. So you can send them an email. Their email is collections@ryerson.ca. So collections with an S at the end at ryerson.ca, and discuss setting up a payment plan.
One of the students sent email or question directly to you via email. So they're basically asking if you could respond to them.
Any inquiry that comes through to my email, I will send you over to our temporary generic email, which is finaid@ryerson.ca. So all of our advisors are able to assist.
Perfect. Okay, so I think we can end the chat. So we received another question. The student indicated on the application that they were applying for the fall term only. Now they are wondering if they can change it to all terms, which I believe they want to include the winter and spring summer terms for next year. Would that be possible?
Yep, you can just give us a call again through the service hub, ideally today as it's our last day of service for a week and a half. So give us a call, 416-979-5036. Ask to speak with a financial aid advisor and we're able to make that change for you.
Thank you. Another question, the student, they're currently out of Canada and never lived in Ontario, and they will be attending classes remotely and will apply for OSAP after landing in Ontario in December or January before the winter term starts. They're basically wondering if the application will be approved.
So it's a little hard to answer here, just for confidentiality reasons, but as a sort of broad paintbrush answer, with OSAP, you need to be living in the province of Ontario for 12 consecutive months before being able to be eligible for the program. And you cannot be studying as part of living here for 12 months. So it needs to be residing here independent of studies. So based on the information that was provided in the question, you wouldn't meet the residency requirement. If you are interested in having a more robust conversation about this, then please contact us through the service hub where it's a little bit more confidential and not with 25 other folks in the room.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Bianca. I think we can end the session now. And thank you again, Bianca, for the wonderful and informative session today. And I will stop the recording here. Have a nice day, everyone.